stay with me. Most NBA franchises spend their entire existence searching for one guy. Not just a good player, not just an all-star. I'm talking about that changed the direction of the franchise type of player. The guy who makes fans say, this is it. The guy who gives a city hope before he even wins anything. The guy who walks into the building and instantly changes expectations. Some franchises never find that player. Some teams draft for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and never land a true franchise-altering superstar. But New Orleans had three: Chris Paul, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson. Three different eras, three types of stars. A generational point guard, a generational big, and a physical force, power forward that people was comparing to LeBron James himself. Most franchises would do anything for that kind of lottery luck. But here's the problem. Since the franchise moved to New Orleans in 2012, the Pelicans/Hornets era has a regular season record of 878 wins to 1,054 losses, a 45% win percentage. They made the playoffs 9 times, won only 2 playoff series, and captured 1 division title. It still has never reached the conference final, not the NBA finals, the Western Conference finals. Not even 1 appearance in the round before the finals. For a franchise that had Chris Paul, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson, that makes no sense. So the question is not, have the Pelicans had talent? They have. The question is not, have the Pelicans had chances? They have. The real question is, how does a franchise get handed superstar after superstar after superstar and still never build something that lasts? Is it bad luck? Is it injuries? Is it the front office? Is it the city? Is it the West? Or is this one of those franchises where everything that can go wrong eventually does? Because the Pelican story is not a story about talentless. It's worse than that. It's a story about having just enough talent to believe and never enough stability to finish. So today we're going into a medical room. We're going into a front office. We're going into a panic trades. We're going into superstar exit. We're going into what is, and we're answering one question. Why can't the New Orleans Pelicans figure it out? To understand New Orleans basketball, you have to start with instability. Because the franchise didn't arrive in New Orleans with a clean slate. It arrived with baggage. The team moved from Charlotte to New Orleans in 2012, still carrying the Hornets name. Still carrying franchise history from another city. And still trying to convince a new market that this team belongs to them. That matters. Because building a basketball culture is not just about wins. It's about roots. It's about identity. It's about fans knowing this is ours. But New Orleans never really got a normal beginning. They arrived in 2002, they made the playoffs early, and then in 2005, Hurricane Katrina changes everything. The team is displaced, they play home games in Oklahoma City, and for 2 seasons, they're essentially a team split between 2 identities: New Orleans Hornets and the Oklahoma City Hornets. A team without a true home, a fan base without rhythm, and a franchise trying to build connection while literally playing hundreds of miles away from the city it represents. And that's important because a small market NBA franchise needs everything advantage it can give. It needs the local buy-in. It needs trust. It needs the city to believe. Instead, New Orleans started its basketball life in chaos. But somehow, in the middle of that chaos, they found the first great hope. Christopher Emmanuel Paul, or some of y'all know as Chris Paul. Chris Paul was the first sign that this franchise could matter. He wasn't just good, he was elitely special. A point guard with control. A forward who can manipulate the game like he was seeing 3 possessions ahead. And by 2008, the Hornets looked like a real problem. 56 win, division title, 2nd seed in the Western Conference. Chris Paul was 2nd in MVP voting, David West was an all-star, and Tyson Chandler gave them a vertical threat and defensive backbone. Pedro Savakovic spaced the floor. The team wasn't a cute story anymore. This team was legitimate. In the first round, they beat Dallas. Then they face the defending champion Spurs in the second round. And they take San Antonio to 7 games. Game 7, at home, a chance to reach the Western Conference Finals. The closest this franchise has ever been. And they lose. Now, losing to the Spurs is not embarrassing. That was Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Major Ginobili, and head coach Greg Popovich. That was a championship machine. But the lesson of that series was bigger than just one loss. New Orleans had Chris Paul. They had the engine. But they didn't have enough around him to survive the deepest parts of the West. They were close, but not complete. And that's a phrase that's going to come up again, because it defines the entire franchise. Close, but not complete. After 2008, instead of building on the foundation, the cracks start showing. The front office does not add the second star. The roster ages, the depth fades. Tyson Chandler is nearly traded to Oklahoma City, only for the deal to fall apart after a failed physical. The chemistry feels fragile, the money gets tight, and Chris Paul starts to realize what stars always realize in small markets when the organization moves too slowly. I might be great enough to make them relevant, but not great enough to fix everything by myself. That is the first Pelican problem. They get the star, but they don't build the complete ecosystem. They get the franchise player, but not the franchise structure. And by 2011, Chris Paul wants out. Then comes the infamous Lakers trade. The deal gets vetoed by David Stearns by, some questionable circumstances, it was rigged. But the deal gets vetoed for basketball reasons. Another video for a whole entire different day. Eventually, Chris Paul ends up in the Lakers' little brother town, the Los Angeles Clippers, which I'm going to plug in that video right now. Go watch Why Can't the Los Angeles Clippers Figure It Out. It's in the playlist. But eventually, Chris Paul ends up as a Clipper. And the first era is the way too many New Orleans eras end, with the superstar leaving before the job is finished. The Pelicans didn't lose Chris Paul because he wasn't good enough. They lost him because they never convinced him the organization was. Then 2012 happens. The franchise wins the lottery, which it was also suspicious how they won the lottery, because the Charlotte Bobcats had only 8 wins. But like I said, since I mentioned the Charlotte Bobcats, let's check out the video. Why can't the Charlotte Hornets figure it out? And I touched a little bit about that too. But the franchise wins the lottery. Enter a power forward who has guard-like skills, Anthony Davis from the University of Kentucky. He arrives, and once again, New Orleans gets a miracle. This is not supposed to happen twice. Most small market teams do not get Chris Paul, lose him, and immediately get Anthony Davis. That's not bad luck. That's incredible luck. Anthony Davis was supposed to be that reset button, a defensive monster, a lob threat, a future MVP candidate. The rare big man who could protect the rim, switch onto guards, score inside, shoot enough to keep the defense honest, and give you a championship-level defensive identity by himself. On paper, he was everything, but Anthony Davis' era becomes the clearest example of the Pelicans' second big problem, availability. Because AD was elite, but he was rarely stable. And this is where the nickname comes in, day-to-day Davis. The nickname was cruel, but it stuck because every season it felt like the same loop. AD dominates, AD gets hurt. The team adjusts, AD comes back. Someone else gets hurt, the loss to lose rhythm, the season slips away, repeat. He never played more than 75 games in a season with New Orleans. And when your franchise player is constantly dealing with shoulder, ankles, hip, back injuries, knees, and random scares that send them to the locker room, you can't build continuity, you can't build chemistry, and you can't build a system. Because every 2 weeks, the team is asking, who are we tonight? That's not how contenders are built. Contenders need identity. The Pelicans had talent by identity that was always temporary. And the front office didn't help. They kept trying to accelerate the timeline. Instead of patiently building through the draft, they chased veterans. They made win-now moves for a team that was not ready to win. They were scared of wasting AD. They made the exact moves that ended up wasting Anthony Davis. That's the small market trap. When you're in New Orleans, you know stars can leave, so you rush, you overpay, you trade picks, and you convince yourself that's solid enough. Omar Essick, Solomon Hill, Eric Gordon, Tyreek Evans. Pieces that were supposed to help, pieces that sometimes made sense in isolation, but together, they never created a real championship roster. They created clutter. The Pelicans were constantly trying to build around AD, while also trying to repair the last mistake they made building around AD. And then finally, for one brief moment, it looked like they had it figured out. In 2018, they had Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins, Drew Holiday, Rajon Rondo, and Nikola Mirotic. This was the first Pelican team after Chris Paul that actually felt dangerous. Not cute, not interesting, dangerous. Boogie and AD was chaos. Two bigs who can score, rebound, pass, and punish physically. Drew Holiday was the defensive guard every contender needs. Rondo gave them the brain, and Mirotic gave them shooting. And suddenly, New Orleans had an identity. They weren't trying to be the Warriors, they were trying to be something different. Big, physical, skill, uncomfortable. It was working. Then, January 26, 2018. Myself, I remember watching this game live on ESPN. And crazy enough, against former New Orleans Pelicans / Hornets point guard Chris Paul. Pelicans versus Rockets, January 26, 2018. New Orleans wins the game, but with seconds left, DeMarcus Cousins ruptures his Achilles. That moment is the Pelicans' entire history in one play. They win the game and lose the future. Because Boogie's injury didn't just take away a player, it took away a version of the Pelicans that finally made sense. New Orleans still goes to sweep Portland in the playoffs, and that sweep matters because it proves that the roster has something real. AD was dominant, Drew put Damian Lillard in basketball jail, Rondo looked like a playoff professor. For one round, the Pelicans look like a team nobody wants to see. They run into Golden State, and without Boogie, the ceiling is obvious. They don't have enough. Again, close, but not complete. And after that, the fallout begins. Boogie leaves, Eddie eventually requests a trade, the Lakers rumors takes over, the relationship breaks, and once again, a generational star exits New Orleans before the team ever reaches a conference finals. Chris Paul left, Anthony Davis left. Two eras, same ending, different details, and the same vicious disease. Then 2019 happens. Again, the Pelicans win the lottery. Again, they get the guy. Again, this one feels different because Zion Williamson was not just a prospect, he was an event. At Duke, he looked unreal. A 280-pound athlete, moving like a guard, jumping like a wing, finishing like Shaq, and creating highlights that didn't look physically responsible. Zion wasn't supposed to be just a franchise player. He was supposed to be a franchise rebirth. The Pelicans traded Anthony Davis and got back a massive package back. Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, draft picks, and then getting Zion Williamson. Suddenly the Pelicans have young talent, assets, and a true new superstar. This is supposed to be the cleanest reset in franchise history. But the Zion era becomes the most frustrating Pelican era because it has always felt like the team is waiting for a version of Zion that only appears in flashes. When Zion plays, the numbers are insane. The efficiency is ridiculous. The pressure he puts on the rim changes the geometry of the floor. Defense collapse, helps defenders panic, and he gets downhill and suddenly the entire possession feels unreal. But that's the problem. It only matters when he plays. For too much of his career, the Pelicans have lived in the gap between Zion potential and Zion availability. Foot injuries, hamstrings, conditioning conversation, weight narratives, return to play drama. Every season brings a new version of the same question. When will Zion be fully available? And that's the question that has become the prison of the franchise. Because if he's available, they have a chance to be special. If he is not, everything else becomes temporary. Brandon Ingram can score, CJ McCollum can stabilize, Herb Jones can defend, Trey Murphy can shoot. But Zion is the swing piece. He is the thing that makes the Pelicans different. Without him, they're just another team fighting for oxygen in the West. And this is where the franchise gets stuck. They can't fully rebuild because Zion upside is too high. They can't fully contend because Zion ability is too uncertain. So they live in the middle. Too talented to tank, too unstable to trust. That is one of the worst places to be in the NBA. Then they try to fix it again. They trade for DeJounte Murray. And on paper, you can see the logic: a veteran guard, a defensive-minded backcourt player, a guy who can organize possession, guard, push tempo, and take the pressure off the stars. But in the Pelicans' debut, Murray broke his left hand. He later returned and suffers a season-ending torn Achilles on January 31st, 2025. That is New Orleans basketball. You trade for stability, and stability breaks in game one. Then breaks again before the season can fully define itself. The same Achilles curse that changed Boogie's career hits another major Pelicans acquisition. And now the franchise is right back where it always ends up. Asking what this team could have been if everybody was healthy at the same time. That phrase is dangerous. If healthy. Because if healthy can buy you years of false hope. If Zion is healthy. If AD stays healthy. If Boogie doesn't tear his Achilles. If DeJounte comes back right. If Drew had enough health. If Lonzo stay. If the roster finally clips. At some point, if healthy stops sounding like optimism, it starts sounding like the whole business model. Now, let's talk about the part that gets hidden behind injuries. Because yes, the Pelicans have been unlucky, but bad luck does not explain everything. At some point, you have to look at the decisions. And the Pelicans' biggest organizational flaw is simple. They keep trying to skip steps. Every era has the same panic. They get the star, they worry the star will leave, so they rush to build. They trade future flexibility for present competence. But the problem is, present competence is not the same thing as contention. There is a difference between help and enough help. A lot of Pelicans moves were designed to make the team respectful. But respectful doesn't win the West. Respectful gets you 38 wins. Respectful gets you the play-in. Respectful gets you a first-round exit. And when franchise players is Chris Paul or Anthony Davis or Zion Williamson, respectful is a failure. Look at AD era. The Pelicans kept spending resources on veterans who were supposed to stabilize the team, but those moves often capped their ceiling. Omer Asik was supposed to give them size. Solomon Hill was supposed to be a wing defender. Eric Gordon was supposed to be part of the post-CP3 reset. Tarek Evans gave them production, but not a clean fit. The issue wasn't that every player was bad. The issue was that New Orleans kept paying for the solution that didn't solve the real problem. They needed star-level creation next to AD. They needed depth. They needed shooting. They needed continuity. Instead, they got a rotation catch of maybe this works. That kind of team building wears down a franchise because every time a move fails, the next move becomes more desperate. And desperation is expensive. Then there's a point guard revolving door. Since Chris Paul left, New Orleans has been trying to replace control. Drew Holiday was the best answer they found, and Drew Holiday was really good. A championship level guard, elite defender, a professional. But even Drew Holiday's tenure came with injuries, roster instability, and tiny issues. Then came Rondo, a one-year rental, a great in the playoffs. Gone after. Lonzo Ball, a perfect connector in theory, a passer, defender, a transitional weapon, but then they let him walk. Then Eric Bledsoe. Then Devontae Graham. C.J. McCollum shifting into a more leader guard responsibility. Then Javonte Murray. It's not that they never had good guards. It's that they never had a long-term offensive organizer after Chris Paul. That matters. Because when you build around bigs like AD and Zion, you need someone who can control the temperature of the game. You need someone who can say, slow down, get him the ball here, run this set, don't panic. The Pelicans have had talent, but they haven't had enough control. And without control, young teams become chaotic. Chaotic teams turns the ball over. Chaotic teams lose leads. Chaotic teams look great for a week, then disappear for a month. That's New Orleans. Burnt promises, then breakdowns. The other issue is what I can call the missing middle. The Pelicans are almost always top heavy. They have the stars. Sometimes they have two, sometimes three. But after that, the rosters drop off. That's not enough reliable middle-class talent. Not enough guys who can play 20 playoff minutes without getting hunted. Not enough two-way wings. Not enough bench creators. Not enough playoff-proof players. And that is the death in the Western Conference, because the West does not give you time to figure things out. The West is not forgiving. One bad month and you're in the play-in. One injury and you're the 11th seed. One failed trade and you lost 2 years. That's the Pelicans' reality. They are the small market team in a conference where the margin for error is microscopic. OKC can build a machine. Denver can develop continuity. Dallas can land players like Luka and Cooper Flag. Minnesota can finally hit on Ant. The Lakers and Warriors can always prove gravity. And New Orleans has to be perfect, but they are almost never are. Now we get to the current mess, because the 2025-26 Pelicans are no longer just a frustrating team. They are an organization facing a full identity crisis. Willie Green was fired after a 2-10 start in November of 2025. And James Borrego took over as interim head coach. That matters because Willie Green was supposed to be the stability guy, a player-friendly coach, a culture builder, and someone who helped guide them through young talent, injuries, expectations in the Zion era. But eventually, the losing becomes too repetitive. And the phrase matter. Repetitive losing is the difference from regular losing. Regular losing can be explained. Bad training night, injuries, schedule, young rush. Repetitive losing means that the same problem keeps showing up in different jerseys. Same late game issues, same injury excuses, same roster imbalance, same lack of identity, same wait until we are healthy speech. At some point, a franchise gets tired of hearing its own excuses. That's what this season feels like. A breaking point. A team that was supposed to be competitive ended up at the bottom of the West. The Pelicans had gone 21-61 in 2024, and their second worst in the New Orleans season, and the 2025-2026 campaign began with another collapse before Green was fired. So now Joe Dumars steps in the picture. And whether you like the direction or not, the message is clear. This organization knows something is broken. Not one player, not one coach, not one injury, the whole machine. When a team keeps on losing the same way, the problem is not just the lineup. It's the culture, it's the process, it's the evaluation, it's the medical, it's the development, it's the communication, it's everything. And this is where the Pelicans becomes interesting, because they have enough talent to avoid being ignored, but enough success to be taken, but not enough success to be taken seriously. That's the brutal place to live as a franchise. Fans knows the names, they knows the upside, they know what the team could be. But every season turns into a waiting room, waiting for Zion, waiting for help, waiting for the next guard, waiting for the front office to pick up a direction, waiting for the West to open up, waiting for the curse to be broken. And eventually, waiting becomes the identity. Now we have to talk about New Orleans itself. And I want to be careful here, because New Orleans is one of the most culturally unique cities in America. The food, the music, the history, the personality, it's one of one. But in NBA terms, it's complicated, because the things that make New Orleans special as a city don't automatically make it as a basketball market. This is not New York. This is not Los Angeles. This is not Miami. This is not a place where stars are lining up to sign because the market size, brand exposure, or endorsement gravity. So New Orleans had to win differently. They have to draft well. They have to develop. They have to stay healthy. They have to manage assets perfectly. And they have to build a culture strong enough to overcome market limitation. That's not impossible. San Antonio did it. Denver did it. And OKC is doing it now. Memphis had done versions of it. The difference is those teams built a recognizable identity. San Antonio has the Spurs way. Denver built around Jokic, continuity, and skill. OKC built around patience, picks, and development. Memphis built toughness. What are the Pelicans' identity? That is the question. Are they a Zion power team? Are they a defensive team? A transition team? A youth development team? A win now team? A patient team? A panic team? Too often they've been all those things at once. And when you're everything at once, you're using nothing clearly. Then there's the conditioning conversation. People brings up New Orleans nightlife. They bring up the food. They bring up Bourbon Street. And sometimes that conversation gets lazy because it's easy to blame a city. The real issue is not New Orleans have good food. The real issue is organizational standards. If your franchise player has conditioning questions, that's not just the city, that's on the player, and that's on the organization, that's on the support system, that's on the culture you built around him. Because if the star is in Miami, people call it discipline when he stays in shape. But if a star is in New Orleans and struggle, people blame the city. But the deeper question, what structure did the Pelicans create to make sure Zion becomes the best version of himself? That's the key. A small market cannot afford Vegas culture. It needs strong culture. It needs clarify. It needs accountability. It needs a development system that protects players from themselves and from the noise. New Orleans has never constantly showed that. And that's why the city conversation matters. Not because New Orleans is the problem, but because the franchise in New Orleans has to be even more intentional. And the Pelicans have rarely felt intentional for long. So let's put it all together. Why can't the Pelicans figure it out? It's not just one thing. It's 4 things happening at the same time. Number 1, health. This is the obvious one. Chris Paul had injuries later, but in New Orleans, the bigger issue was roster support. Anthony Davis was constantly dealing with something. DeMarcus Achilles at worst time possible. Zion's career has been defined by ability questions. DeJounte Murray gets hurt immediately and then suffers Achilles injury. So at some point, your best basketball can't live only in theory. You can't win playoff series without hypothetical lineups. Number 2, assets management. The Pelicans often wins the lottery and then act like the clock is about to explode. Instead of building slowly, they rush. Instead of stacking young talent, they trade picks. Instead of creating pipelines, they patch its holes. The problem is not that they can try to help their star. The problem is that they often help them in ways that limit the future. Number 3, lack of continuity. Chris Paul leaves, AD leaves, Boogie gets hurt, Drew gets traded, Lonzo leaves, coaches changes, front office direction shift, the name changes, the identity changes, the timeline changes. Every year, New Orleans is starting over emotionally, even when they're not fully rebuilding. That is exhausting for a franchise. And number 2, the small market pressure. When you're in New Orleans, you know the stars may not stay. The fear shapes decisions. It makes you overpay. It makes you rush. It makes you convince yourself that one veteran is the answer, but the fear is not a team building strategy. And that's the Pelicans' tragedy. They've been lucky enough to get players that should change everything, but never had the stability to make those players matter long enough. So here we are, 24 seasons in New Orleans, 3 franchise-altering stars, 9 playoff appearances, 2 playoff series wins, 0 conference finals. And that is why the Pelicans are one of the strangest franchises in the NBA. They are not hopeless. Hopeless teams don't get Chris Paul. Hopeless teams don't get Anthony Davis. Hopeless teams don't get Zion Williamson. Hopeless teams don't have moments where you look at the roster and say, wait, it could actually work. That's the Pelicans' problem. Their problem is worse. They're always just enough to make you believe. Just enough talent. Just enough upside. Just enough flashes. Just enough it healthy. Just enough next year. Just enough to keep the dream alive. But never enough to make the dream real. Because in New Orleans, the question has never been, can they find a star? They can. The question is, can they keep the star healthy? Can they build the right team around? Can they avoid the panic? Can they survive the West? Can they stop treating every era like a race against time? Because every time the Pelicans get close to something real, something breaks. A body, a trade, a relationship, a timeline, a plan. And eventually when the same thing keeps happening in different eras, it stops feeling like bad luck. It starts feeling like identity. So maybe the Pelicans aren't cursed. Maybe they're just the NBA's greatest reminder that talent is only the beginning. Stars gives you hope, but a structure gives you a future. For 24 years, the New Orleans has hope. They had highlights, they had names, and they had moments, but they never had one thing every serious franchise needs: a foundation that survives when the star isn't enough. So until they fix the medical room, until they stop the panic trading, until they build real depth, until they create an identity that lasts longer than one healthy stretch, the Pelicans will keep living in the same place they lived since Chris Paul first made them believe. Close enough to dream, too broken to finish, always talented, always waiting, and always almost.